Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Blazon from 20th Century Games. Blazon is a game of building out your shield's heraldry. You're basically going to be operating, every player is going to have their own little shield board, and the effective goal of the game is to gather these various cards and to place them down onto your board in order to score points from the cards themselves and in order to fulfill goals, and to do so most efficiently before the game ends. Game end is going to be triggered in one of three ways. Either a player's board is completely full, they have a card down every single area, or alternatively you've crossed 50 points on your board, or alternatively you have a token. If a single player has a token in every one of the 5 goals from these tokens over here, then that will trigger endgame. All the other players will get one more turn, and then you'll score up your points in the game. Now, as far as what you can do on your turn, you're going to take one of 2 actions on your turn. The first action is gathering cards. You'll start with 4 cards, but on your turn you can go ahead and you can take cards from either of these 2 decks. So for example, I can go ahead and pick cards from each deck, and then I can keep these if I want, or I can exchange them with cards in the row over here. So for example, I particularly want this card over here. In fact, actually I want this card too, but you know what, we're just going to go ahead and take this. I do want this card. See, this card is going to fulfill that goal and that goal. You see this symbol over here, that's going to feed towards both those goals, so I'm going to hold on to this card. This one, on the other hand, this particular symbol is not present on any of those, and we do have the crown somewhere. We do not have any crowns, so this card is not that helpful to me. Instead, I'm going to exchange it out, and I'll go for perhaps this one, perhaps this one. Let's go for, let's try to get ourselves one of some of these symbols over here, so we'll exchange this out for this card here. That's going to be your turn. You effectively go ahead and gather cards, taking 2 cards from either combination of decks, grabbing them, and then choosing which ones you want to keep, which ones you want to hold on to. You do have a hand limit of 7 in the game. That is one thing you can do on your turn. Now you can keep doing that, and in fact I'll go ahead and keep grabbing a few cards just for the sake of having a hand before I take my next action, because the next action you take on your turn is you can go ahead and play cards onto your shield. You can start creating your heraldry over here, and when you do so, effectively you're going to be discarding cards to pay for other cards. Cards have a prestige value on them, so for example this prestige value of 2 or 3 or 3 or 2 or 3 or whatever, and you're going to be discarding cards to pay for other cards with specific rules as far as how they go into your board. So for example, right now I want to get this card in play, so I'm going to play this card, and this card is going to fall into one of those circles. It's a tincture card, which means you're looking at these circles over here. Tinctures have a bit more freedom, but they also have restrictions in the sense that you cannot have the same tincture symbol in this row or in these 2 cards. So a little bit of restrictions. That symbology is over here to show you cannot do that. But I'll discard this tincture over here in order to pay and put this tincture down in play, and I'm specifically going to put it on this row over here. From there I'll go ahead and discard this card to put this tincture in play. So I'm going to put another tincture in play, and this is the first restriction you have to be mindful of, which is you have to ensure that you always have the same ordering of the cards in terms of top or bottom within a row. So for example, because this card is shifted downwards instead of shifted upwards, I have to play this the same way. I cannot have these separately shifted when they are on that row. Additionally, it's worth noting that, well, that's going to be as far as the row goes. Within different rows you could. So for example, over here, that would be legal. Well, it would be legal if it's over here, I should say, because of the symbology. But, so let's go ahead and put this back here. We've done that. And then let's put this into play. Now, this particular card only goes down here. You can see that symbol over here, and it shows you on the card as well where a card potentially can go. So you can see this tincture over here could go in any of those rows potentially, depending on how you orient it, top or bottom. In this case, we're going to go ahead and discard the 3 for the 2, because you have to pay that amount of prestige points has to be paid. I cannot discard the 2 for the 3. That's not enough. I could discard the 3 for the 2, so I'll do so, and I'll place this down over here, and then I'm going to take points for all the cards I just put down. So 2, 2, and 3, that's going to be 7 points. I'm going to move that up. That is the other thing you do on your turn, which means the pattern of Blazon is typically that you're going to spend a few turns gathering cards, and then a single turn playing down a bunch of cards, and you're trying to place those cards down both for the points, to be mindful of the hierarchy as far as how you can actually place things down into your grid, and then to be mindful of the goals, because ultimately trying to achieve these goals. In fact, right now I currently have 2 of the 3 tincture symbols I need to be able to put my marker down over here and score points for that. And so you're trying to balance that as you play through the game. That's basically what's happening. There's a few other things to note. There's going to be things like you can clear this row whenever you have 3 of the same symbol or 3 of the same, this other symbol. There's going to be 2 types of symbols over here, both going towards goals. If there's ever too much commonality, too much overlap, you have the opportunity to clear the row over there. There's also going to be these tokens, which you'll start with and you can earn. Whenever a player passes these scoring markers, they're here, here, and here, you will get one of these over here, which is worth 2 points, but other players will get one of these, which they can trade in for an instant bonus. Things like taking cards right away, things like paying for a card card with one of these, making any card cost 1 effectively, clearing the rows. There's a bunch of opportunities you can use as far as 4 different ways you can utilize those, and you're doing that all to fill this grid over here slowly. Now, again, a few other small edge cases. I'll just give you one example. I'm not going to go into everything, but for example, one of the things you can do in the game is you can overlay cards. So when you play down a card, at first you're going to start playing into other areas in the grid, but there will be times in the game where in order to play the card, in order to get those points, you'll need to overlay it on something else. The problem is, just because you're overlaying something doesn't mean you can shift the row and the orientation unless you do so all at once. So for example, you can completely play down cards if it overlays everything and replaces everything, but you cannot partially replace a row, which results in a misalignment of your cards. That's basically what's going on in Blazon. You're going to be going ahead and putting your tokens into these areas here as you score these. They're worth more points whoever gets them first. Right now this is oriented for a 1 or 2 player game over here. These have different scoring depending on the player count. You're trying to get your tokens into there as fast as possible, both for the extra points as well as potentially to trigger endgame to deny your opponent's points. You're going to have the endgame scoring over here where you'll get points for the most in each symbol type, as well as points for having specific goals over here in terms of points for your extra, for these tokens over here, for these tokens, for you filling your board, you'll get 2 points. For not using this over here, you'll get 8. You won't lose 8 points. Whole bunch of things you can do as far as different things you're getting points for. You're going to play that across a variable number of rounds until one of the 3 endgame conditions is triggered, and that's Blazon, which brings us to the review, starting off with ease of play, which frankly wasn't the best. The rulebook for Blazon has a very high attachment to a lot of specific terminology, and then you combine that with examples and I think general rulebook stuff that wasn't the best, and it resulted in possibly one of the more confusing rulebooks for a game that I think is pretty simple. I think the game is very accessible in terms of teaching the game. I think it's a very easy game to get people up and running, to teach them what's going on, but the rulebook, I don't know if it's a lack of pictures, I don't know, and there are pictures in the book, I just don't know what it was. I found the rulebook to be particularly difficult given the actual difficulty of the game, which isn't that high. So, not the worst, you could get through it, it is a short rulebook, so it's not that bad, it's just that, again, depth to I felt it should have been easier. That's where I am with the rulebook. Past that, the game plays in around 45 minutes. It could be half an hour if you're moving pretty quickly. I don't know what the box actually says. The box is 30 to 60 minutes, so that seems about right. And the game itself is fairly easy to actually teach once you get past the rulebook part. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, the first thing is this ultimately is a game of point scoring optimization, which is a mechanic I enjoy in general. You're trying to figure out how to get the most points in the game. You're trying to figure out what to do. Is it about playing those cards? Is it about trying to draw your hand into those 4 or 5 prestige cards and discarding the right cards to be able to pay for the right cards, putting them down to your grid, getting chunks of points as you go? Are you primarily trying to go for the various goals in here because those might be your pathway towards victories and or driving endgame? There's different things you're trying to do as far as what you try to pull, what you try to go for, how you use your various tokens over here to be able to get the extra bonuses. Ultimately, this is a game of trying to figure out how to optimize while being somewhat restricted by what can actually go into your heraldry in the game. And so you're trying to balance all these goals, you're trying to balance all that. The overlaying cards is another fun thing where you have to try to figure out, are you constantly trying to fill out your grid to drive endgame, or are you going to be overlaying cards because you're restricted in certain patterns, and sometimes that's what you need to do in order to accomplish certain goals within the game. And so there's lots of decisions as far as how you balance all of these factors as you play through the game. As far as what I don't like in the game, first of all, the board isn't the most readable over here. And that's true for the, in general, just the amount of symbology. It's the kind of thing that, once you're 2 or 3 games in, it is very, very easy and quick to pick up. But starting off the bat, it's a lot of symbols, a lot of icons, a lot of things, and the board, again, itself is not the most readable. Both the general board that gives you the player aid, so to speak, as well as your personal board, not the worst over there. I would say that that's a small complaint. The bigger complaint I have is that past how you manage to score for your goals, and how you balance when and where you're going for goals and what cards to gather for that, I found a lot of the decisions in Blazon felt a little bit, I'd say direct, a little bit more obvious. You're trying to draw cards, but very often discarding cards that have the same prestige value to pay for cards with the same prestige value just means cards with higher prestige values are almost always better. The fact that you might be able to get a goal and get a few extra points when you can get a prestige card that is 5 points instead of 2, it means that prioritizing high prestige value cards is almost always the right move, and there's a little bit of navigation as far as other edge cases, but I generally felt that most of the decisions I made in Blazon felt, for the most part, procedural, with a little bit of challenge and balance as far as what goals other players are going for and how you can try to sneak in there earlier. So I felt the decision base was a little lighter than what I typically want for this kind of game. As far as what I can see others not liking, going back to that aspect I mentioned about the drawing cards and the 4 or 5 value prestige things, if you draw better cards, both with the symbols you need, if you draw the right symbols for your goals, if you draw higher prestige value cards, there is a degree of luck in the game if players are drawing into things that are just better, either personally because of the things they're going for, or just straight up prestige value compared to yourself. And yes, there is that aspect of you can trade in for the card row, and you will do that in order to accomplish goals, but at the end of the day, the 4 or 5 point cards are going to be mostly drawn and will not stay heavily into the card row, so there certainly is that degree of luck in the game. As far as final thoughts on Blazon, I overall enjoyed my experience with Blazon, while also feeling that within the genre of what this game does, within the genre of point scoring optimization games, you're trying to balance a bunch of goals, you're trying to figure out how to get as many points as possible as you take into account multiple factors, multiple criteria, try to optimize your actions. Within that genre of games that has a lot of games that I enjoy, I felt Blazon had a more messy rulebook and getting past it and getting into the experience, as well as being a little lighter on the actual decision space than what I'm personally looking for out of this genre. I enjoyed my time with it, I enjoyed my play with it, I do enjoy it, but for me it's a 3 out of 5. It's good, I enjoy it, but it's not one I'm necessarily going to overly miss. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Gartenbau from 20th Century Games as well. I felt Gartenbau is a similar kind of genre of point scoring optimization that I really enjoyed a lot more the decision space as far as what you go for and how you try to build out your flowers within that game. And if you're looking for a game that had a degree of tile laying kind of, and a little bit of a similar feeling while being within the same genre, Overboss from Brotherwise Games gave me a very similar vibe as far as how you place tiles down and how you try to take into account building out a very limited space while trying to be mindful of the various points you're going to be getting along the way. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.